the second in our series of fireside chats with the preachers for these Eucharists for the Sundays of Easter. And this morning I'm joined by the Venerable Graham Knott, who is Vicar General, Archdeacon of the Southern Region and the Rector of Leongatha. We'll talk about a little bit of that in a moment, but as Vicar General, Graham has the ministry of oversight if I'm away from the diocese, involved in wider church commitments or on leave or for whatever reason, that falls to Graham, and it's a very important and significant role in ministry to us. Graham, thank you for your homily today and for reminding us of the importance of questions, and it's lovely to have a chance just to wonder aloud together for a few minutes and to get to know a little bit of your journey in ministry too in the process. One thing, my mother would challenge the use of the word kenosis in Scrabble on the basis that it's Greek.
Oh, right.
But that's probably a technicality, and she's a bit of a stickler for those things when it comes to Scrabble. Graham, I've talked a little bit about what it means to be Vicar General, but as an Archdeacon, and we didn't touch on this in our conversation last week with Brenda, tell us a little bit about the role of an Archdeacon in the life of the Church.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. The role of the Archdeacon is to, I think, both represent the bishop in the region where we are Archdeacon, but also to be the kind of eyes and ears of the bishop in a friendly way to ensure that all's going well with the clergy in our region and particularly in the parishes, and to be consulted on matters to do with buildings and change, and to also, I think, assist parishes with their future plans and development, and to relate all of that into the bishop and to bishop and council. We're there really to answer questions that come our way, but above all, I think it's really it's that mix between being a balance really between being pastorally caring but also administratively efficient within the life of the local parish. So really those two things I think come together.
And as a member of diocesan staff, along with the regional deans and the dean and the registrar and the Anglican Parish Partnerships coordinator, I really value your role in that kind of collegial kind of reflection and visioning, a word you brought before us again in your homily today, and just working through collectively some of the strategic and pastoral challenges before us as a diocese. And there have been a few of those this year between the bushfires and COVID-19 as we were reflecting last week, and I appreciated your encouragement to just turn the radar of attention a little bit away from the what we experience as the problems associated with the pandemic into some of the other kind of aspects of the rhythms and the kind of spaces we're inhabiting at the moment. And I think that's an excellent challenge for us in the days ahead. But that said, just tell us a little bit perhaps about how things have been in Leongatha in recent weeks for you, and some of the kind of pastoral challenges and the creative responses that the parish has had in continuing to serve the community in which you set.
Yeah, we've done, I think, many of the same things as other parishes have done. And so we have daily worship, morning prayer in particular is offered by Zoom every morning, and there's quite a little dedicated community who've got together for that. We have small groups which are offered again by Zoom throughout the week fairly regularly. And I think one feature that has been strong for us has been a couple who've been doing our children's ministry weekly online as well. I think one of the questions that I asked myself at the beginning of this was much of my ministry is about how can I develop the ministry of other people. And so my first question for myself wasn't how can I run around and get busier and do everything, but how can I help to equip the laity to continue to grow in their ministries and to develop other ministries. So I think that's been a feature of the kind of questioning that we're asking of ourselves in Leongatha. I asked Belinda Seabrook, my colleague, to actually become our response coordinator. As you know, Belinda was only ordained deacon at the beginning of February, so she's kind of been plunged into a very different form of sort of church and training in terms of ordination as to what would normally have been the expectation. So it was in part a desire to actually give her something really meaty to work on during this time. I think I hear from many of my peers as well that we've actually rediscovered a lot of people who we'd lost contact with. And this whole exercise has meant that we've gathered together all of our contacts in such a way that we think, wow, actually the church is much, much bigger than we thought in terms of that. One of the things Belinda did, which turned out to be a real blessing, was got the last box of 500 individually packed breads and wines, grape juice in this case, which we distributed to many households consecrated on Palm Sunday and were distributed to as many of our households as requested that for Easter Sunday. So we were able to have some sort of joint celebration. I think that's one of the biggest losses, the opportunity to gather for the Eucharist every Sunday, I think has proved to be a tremendous loss for people, which surprises me, because we were living in an age where we were getting used to seeing people perhaps twice a month. Our number of weekly regulars was beginning to go down. So it's really interesting, I think, what's going on. We're not too sure what the financial challenges in Leongatha are going to be. At the moment, I think that will take us a couple of months to work that one out.
Thanks, Graham. It's really encouraging to hear what you've been doing at a local level. And as you say, I think there's been a wonderful collective response across the diocese and our parishes and other agencies and mission initiatives in terms of continuing to meet the needs of our people in difficult circumstances. And there's been great intention and purposefulness and creativity around that. So thank you for sharing what you've been doing. Of course, your journey to Leongatha is quite a circuitous one, and your journey into ordained ministry has seen you backwards and forwards between Australia and the UK, where you spent your early years of ministry in holy orders. Tell us a little bit about your spiritual journey and your sense of vocation and calling into ordained ministry, and a little bit, I guess, about the differences that you've observed between ministering in the context of the Church of England and here in the Anglican Church of Australia. What are some of the resonances and things that strike you as being slightly different about those two contexts?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting story, because of course I was sort of born in the UK, but I was bred and buttered in Australia, really. I kind of grew up in Tasmania and South Australia, and it was I became a Christian in, although perhaps I'll say, my family has been a Christian family on my mother's side for hundreds of years. There have been clergy in our family for centuries. Some of them have been in different denominations. They haven't all been Anglicans. I have the dubious distinction of being the great-grandson of the first person, I believe, who was sacked by Spurgeon. And the great Baptist leader, and he was sacked by Spurgeon because he baptised a critically ill baby. And the words that it said was that Mr. Sturgis was beseeched by the parents of a critically ill baby to baptise the child, and he capitulated. Whereupon the Baptist Church threw him out. And so I still think, great granddad, that was a great thing to do. So he didn't become an Anglican, he became what's known as a continuing Methodist. But he did minister in the last place I ministered in the UK, which was in Watford, which is kind of historic. The Vicar of Watford is a historic title, which the church dates back to 1219. And there's now 14 or 15 parishes in Watford, but the Vicar of Watford is this august, venerable position kind of thing, which is, it was a great church in the middle of Watford. Not sure about Elton John owning the footy club, but that used to be 100 and something years ago. The Sunday afternoon football club of Watford Parish Church is Watford Football Club. Well, I went back to England for what I thought was a year, and really had a vision, actually. I haven't told you how I became a Christian. I became a Christian in Adelaide, in a church called Holy Trinity, when a chap called Lance Shilton was the rector there. Lance Shilton was, I suppose you'd describe him as a conservative evangelical, but he was very much into social justice and social action, and very much into evangelism and church growth. And it was a thriving church in those days, with links into, in those days, the Bishop of Liverpool, who became the Bishop of Liverpool, who was a test cricketer for the UK, I can't remember the name, David Shepherd.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and John Stott used to come and preach quite often, so a lot of the big evangelical names used to go there. What impressed me was when my father died, we didn't have any transport and he was in hospital, and Lance Shilton came out to our house, which was about 8 or 9 miles out of town, and he was with us at sort of midnight the night before, and then came out at about 8:30 to take us back to the hospital, where my father subsequently died at just after 9 in the morning. This is when I was must have been 13, something like that. And I was so impressed that this guy, who had such a big staff, who had thousands of people who went to church, could find time for one family who had, just needed help, really. And so that was it was his, I think, love and attention, beyond all the sermons, beyond all the teaching, beyond everything else, that said there must be something in this Jesus Christ thing. And as a result of that, I was confirmed, and we'll describe that as the time when I became a Christian. Went back to the UK with my mother and older sister for what I thought would be a year, and reluctantly, when I was kind of 17, thought it would be a year, and it turned out to be something like 30. I ended up looking after Mum, I ended up doing. And I actually had a vision, while I was asleep one night, calling me towards ordination. Wasn't in those days the sort of thing that one talked about at selection conferences. I think we're more friendly to those sort of things nowadays. And it was really interesting because the precise words that I woke from the dream with were, "Tell my people I love them, tell my people I care." That was in about 1971, and then in about 6 or 7 years later, there was a song that was written that actually had precisely those words in it. And that's always been, I think, a feature of my ministry, that, it's kind of for the people who feel that life has been difficult for them, abandoned, the marginalised, the excluded. That's always been the feature of ministry. In the UK, I think, you asked me the difference between ministering in the two places. I think you are part of a much bigger concern. The Church of England is, a large organisation, even though it comes down to the same level of people meeting together in parishes. establishment, I think, where the Crown is the head of the church, the Archbishop of Canterbury and York, but Canterbury in particular, are very much a respected voice for the church. And of course in the House of Lords, the upper chamber where some bishops sit. And so they're sitting at that place in government. So it's a relatively simple procedure to be able to get money to run social projects, for example, from the government. The government recognise that churches doing a really good job with a large volunteer base with a very limited amount of money. And so it's a real shock when you come into a system where the church's voice, but also the church's resources, really, in terms of its people, are kind of viewed rather more cynically within the community and at that grant-making level. And so at every parish that I was in the UK, we had large projects working with the homeless, drug addicts, young people, the excluded, whatever it was. It was relatively easy to do that. So I think here, still in the UK, although the UK is changing rapidly with secularisation, the church is still at the centre of that community, serving it. And I think one of the things, for example, that Justin Welby, when he was announced as Archbishop of Canterbury, on that day he said to the payday lenders, the lenders, the payday lenders who charged something like 5,000% or something ridiculous in the UK because they had no limits, he said, I'm going to put you out of business. Now if our new Primate said that in Australia, everyone would go to, excuse me, pardon. But he actually did it because he set up community banks through churches, and because of the pressure that they can bring from government in a way that we can't here. So the real power to affect social change through having a voice, is different here.
How do you think we replicate the capacity to have a voice in those kinds of issues and dialogues from our position in Australia, which is more marginal, especially in a kind of post-Royal Commission context, given that we don't have those structural places from which to speak in our culture and society, how do we find our voice again from the edges?
I think that's actually a very good question right for the moment too, because we're on the edges in terms of not being able to gather together. So I think it's a really good question. I think it's the opportunity for me to actually, in a sense, rediscover Jesus of Nazareth and say, well, how did he do it? He did it from the edges. And he worked with people from the edges, the Galileans, these Galileans, rough-speaking guys and all of that stuff. So learning to speak from the edges with integrity, I think is a very powerful way of doing things, and maybe the way that we have to, that we do it is not by dreaming the big projects, but actually in terms of walking in smaller ways and seeing the value of walking in those smaller ways with integrity in terms of local projects.
As you were saying in your sermon today, really, that walking in company with others, asking those questions, those conversations as we interrogate the scriptures reverently, tradition.
I mean, I ministered for 10 years. I mean, I can just give this as an example. I ministered for 10 years in the UK in a place called Newark. I could talk about another place, which was great for social projects as well. But in Newark, at that stage, I mean, I was, 5 of us actually got together and decided that we wanted to build a hospice. We signed a mortgage on a property for, I think it was £260,000 and we had £10,000 in the bank, whereupon we lost 2 of the 5 because they said you're absolutely mad. Well, that facility we had to spend double that amount of money on to open, and it opened within about 2 or 3 years and was actually debt-free in about 5 years. At the same time as that, I was chairman of the Newark Homelessness Forum. At the same time as that, we actually bought some properties to work with 16 to 25-year-old homeless people in order to give them life skills, housing, experience, how to get work. All of those things are still ongoing. At the same time of that, I was chairman of governors of 3 schools. I was chaplain of a 125 geriatric bedded hospital. I was a chaplain in a further education college, and we had a community sort of parish of 12,000 people. Now, you couldn't even envisage doing that in Australia because, first of all, it wouldn't happen, but secondly, the level of expectation in each of those areas would destroy whoever tried to do that amount of work. And I'm not saying I'm a great hero. What I'm saying is that there's the capacity to make things happen in the UK at that level, which actually there isn't that same capacity here. So it is a matter, I think, of us saying, we plant acorns here, and that acorn, may not develop fully into an oak tree under us. We may have to gift it to the communities of which we're part. But alongside that, I think the other thing I'd say is that in order to be a strong and credible and social agency for change within your community, I think the other thing we must give ourselves to is developing strong disciples of Christ. Because if we develop strong disciples of Christ, it's them who will do the work out in the community. It's them who can, stand with credibility in community organisations in the way that people with dogmas can't easily do it.
Absolutely. The ministry of all the baptised, which you referenced earlier. And in a sense, as you said, enabling the ministry of the baptised is, core business for those of us who are ordained. And you mentioned selection conferences before, which of course is part of that discernment process on the way to testing a calling to ordination. One of the hats you wear here, Graham, one of the portfolios you have as Archdeacon is as Ministry Development Officer, which means that you kind of have overview of the process from when someone starts to wonder whether they might be being called, as you were, to holy orders, right through to the day of ordination and beyond, the post-ordination training. Tell us just a little bit about that in the Diocese of Gippsland, and also perhaps your sense of where the tide is in terms of vocations to ordained ministry in our church. And I'll invite you perhaps to offer a word of encouragement, or even a gentle challenge perhaps to some of the clergy and lay people who might be listening to us today.
I think it's really interesting. I was ordained in 1980, so 40 years this year, and the road to that was quite a long road. It was probably 1973, I'm guessing, when I first went to my first selection conference. I went to 2 selection conferences, and the first one said not yet, which was the right recommendation. But between those years, 71 to 73, of the church that I then attended, and I was the youth leader, there were 16 people came out of that congregation looking at the possibility of ordination. And I remember, the rector with great affection and everything else, a very interesting guy. He'd gone to Oxford University and whatever, and for a young person, he was absolutely scary. But he had this quality of actually drawing people out from the congregation, seeing the potential in them, and saying, you know, what is God doing in your life? And what I notice about vocations is that, and not just in this diocese, I mean in the UK as well, is that they do tend to come from a certain number of churches. And there are particular clergy who through their journey in life seem to be able to encourage others into all forms of, you know, service, from mission service to, you know, to chaplaincy, to ordination, to becoming lay workers and so on. And there are other clergy who don't. And I think that's very sad, because in biblical models, I kind of hold before me sort of, the relationship between Elijah and Elisha. And then, you know, where does it go after Elisha? You know, it just gets kind of disappears really in a visible sense. And I think that our greatest responsibility is to pass it on, you know, and pass it on to people who will proclaim the faith differently in their generation. One of the lines in the Church of England ordination service talks about us being called to proclaim the faith afresh in each generation. So I think it's a primary responsibility, actually incumbent on clergy, to call forth, you know, the next generation in every area, you know, be it from youth workers through to whatever. Who's coming up? Who's coming next? Who's not how well are we doing now, but who's coming through? Who's coming forward? And so I think the first thing that I want to see from every clergy person, okay, is that they're still excited about God. They're still excited about this call to ministry that has got hold of them at some point, that they're still passionate about that they want to share that they want to share the message of the good news, and that in actual fact that there is something very precious about responding to the call of God in such a way that you give yourself wholeheartedly and whole-timedly, full-time, to that call of God in a way actually that lay people rarely can do in the same way. Now, what do I mean by that? I don't mean lay people can't serve the Lord sort of 24/7. What I mean by that is that we are called aside into a particular relationship, which is a blessed relationship, which is one of prayer and pastoring and support, you know, and it's a wonderful vocation, you know, because still at the end of the day, you know, we are only probably required to spend 20% of our time on stuff. Clergy will tell you, you know, we all tell you we're stressed and we're all whatever, but we're stressed because we're self-starters. We're not stressed because the organisation is going, you will do, you will do, you will do. So it's an amazing occupation for anybody to have, to actually, and to see people thriving in that shape for which God has developed them. You know, why would you hold back? You know, now I understand why clergy hold lay people back, because they say, oh, you know, if I let Tom go off and be ordained, I've got nobody left. Tom is the life and soul of the church, you know. But what I want to say to that clergy person is, let Tom fly, and God will actually give you Brian or someone else, because God will give you what you give away. You know, what you give to the wider church will come back to you. And there's nothing better. You know, I mean, I've seen a number of people come into ordained ministry. I've probably had about, Belinda's probably my 11th or 12th curate over the years. There is no more fulfilling thing than actually seeing these people really grow into ministry and do far more than you've done, you know. And you can say, that's my girl, or that's my boy, or whatever it happens to be, you know. They're out there, and it's wonderful. So I would say, you know, I mean, I could talk about this forever, you know, but we want to catch the passion. And once you catch the passion and God gets hold of you, then life will never be the same. And I'm 40 years old and I'm still, you know, I'm tired, but I'm still as excited about the possibility of what God can do in the future, and is doing around us already. And so I would say to people, catch that, answer that, you know, and follow it through. Don't let anything stand in your way. It's not an easy journey, which was the other thing I said in this morning's sermon.
Well, thank you, Graham, for your contagious passion, for the wonderful work you do in mentoring others, for your service to the diocese and the wider church in so many different capacities, and again for breaking open the word for us this morning in our worship. It's really appreciated. Bless you.